everyone, and welcome back to Moonbeaming. I'm so thrilled you're here. My name is Sarah Faith Gottesdiener. If you are just joining us, this is a podcast where we talk about reality through a holographic lens. We explore archetypes and magic and philosophy and depth psychology and creativity and a bunch of other stuff, all through a expansive and discerning lens. And today's episode is definitely in that ballpark. What would be a non-sports ball analogy? That cauldron, that garden, definitely in that garden, definitely in that pond, because today we are diving into the shadow of the Chariot archetype, our card of the year, number 7 in the major arcana, one of my favorite tarot cards, maybe one of your favorite tarot cards, who knows? And we're doing it. It's a tarot card if you like it. It's a terror card if you don't, right? That's how it goes here. Waka waka, I'll be here all year. Yes, I will. If I can't crack myself up, why am I here? Why am I here with you? Come on. You're smiling a little bit, right? Just a little smile. All right. I wanted to bring on one of my favorite thinkers, my favorite tarot thinkers, facilitators, teachers to discuss this archetype shadow. And so today we have on with us the one and only Sanyu Estelle. Sanyu Estelle is a claircognizant soothsayer that is also known as the Word Witch because of her deep love for word origins, aka etymology, and word culture, philology. Haven't heard of that word. It's really cool. She identifies as a pigmented 82%, womanist, as constant as the tides, word to Alice Walker, sissy, femme but hetero-ish, flexible, asexual, it's a spectrum, seems unwise to call it, travel apt, earth is a country, and fashion forward, funk, flag, flyage, SSJW, sarcastic, social justice warrior. Now that is a bio, my friends. That is a bio. Sanyu Estelle is also a very gifted reader and a very gifted teacher. I highly recommend getting a reading with her. She's so fantastic. And she just knows the tarot so well that I wanted to have her on to talk about the shadow sides of the Chariot. And we talk about what the shadow is, what the shadow can be for. We discuss all kinds of things. We talk about bulldozing and sustaining success and redefining success and some of the pitfalls and the challenges of this really powerful archetype. We also discuss the nuances, the differences between the shadow aspects of an archetype and a reversal. So for all of you who are curious about what it means when you pull the Chariot reversed, we talk about it. So that's great. Whether or not you care about tarot, whether or not you're a tarot enthusiast, you are going to love this conversation simply because we just cover so much in it, so much about what humans go through and how to human and how to deal. So I just know you're really going to love it. You'll be smiling and nodding along wherever you are. Here is a wonderful conversation with Sanyu Estelle about the shadows of the Chariot. I feel so lucky to get to introduce you all again to this fantastic host, philosopher, thought leader, fashionista, psychic, singer, and so much more. I have the one and only Sanyu Estelle with us today on the podcast.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I am well, having some mercurial funnies, was not challenges, I won't call them difficulties, but it's just forcing me to clean things up on my computer, in my home. So I am on cleanup duty. How are you?
I'm good. In true Chariot fashion, we're framing challenges as funnies and as signals to what we need to do to keep it moving. I think because I became acquainted with your work like in 2020 or something like that. I don't think we've ever met IRL, but
Yeah.
every time we get together on the digital realm, not every time, but times have been like the technology melts, the frequencies like
Yes.
glitch. So all I'm saying is listeners, friends, you are witnessing some beautiful power that we're going to be creating together because we literally shift and change frequencies and electrical currencies when we get into the same bubble. So we're in
Yes.
for a very fun, very powerful ride. And I have invited Sanyu Estelle onto the podcast to talk about the shadow of the archetype of the chariot. And last time you were here to talk about the shadow of the lovers, you can listen to that episode. It is still live on the podcast feed. It is one of like in the top 13 listened to episodes. So everyone loved that one.
Yay.
Yay. When I asked you how you defined and thought of the shadow, you gave such an interesting answer. It was one that I had never heard before. I was really hoping that you could recount that now to start us off thinking about the shadow. I
Oh,
think it
yes,
was
yes,
from your
yes.
Ifa tradition.
Yes, yes. I was saying that in Ifa, your shadow is like, I mean, and even in like, let's say, existential esoteric terms, your shadow is, in a way, like your higher self that has come down with you to earth to document your doings and to account, basically to account for you, but to account for you in a way that is more truthful, more unbiased than you yourself, depending on how honest you are with yourself, and also just how much you can actually know in the context of having an incarnate experience. And so your shadow, when you die in Ifa, reports on your doings when you transition from your body and accounts for what you do, regardless of how you account for yourself. So it's an accounter, it holds you accountable. It holds you accountable as the shadow, and it's also your witness, your life witness.
In your tradition, is it recommended to develop a intimate relationship with the shadow?
Not in that form. It's not like an active relationship that one has to have.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like you practice being of good character, and so you don't have to really concern yourself with what the shadow says, because it's gonna account for that, regardless of how much you know at any given time. And the only way that we do sort of account for the shadow, at least in my experience, because obviously there's like many, many layers and dimensions to the knowledge and to the access and to the wisdom. But like the way that you think about the shadow archetypally is as something that is aware of you, and that specifically you, because of course existence is aware of us, but it's aware of everything. But your shadow is, your higher self. I think the way that I would say it is that your shadow is like the soul to your spirit, in that there's the spiritual archetypal idea that you, before you incarnate have for a life, and then there's the life that you actually lead based on all the micro choices that you make over time, and that everyone else makes, and that the collective makes, and that that dictates how you go about your ultimate spiritual contract or plan, quote unquote. And I mean, and of course, there's that image of like Peter Pan and his shadow when they're having the conversation about like, you know, go tell them I said this, that, and the other, you know, but you don't tell the shadow what to do. It's not there to be like dictated to by you. It's just there to account and witness.
That's interesting. In the car today, as I was driving around thinking about the shadow, I thought about how literal, like I just literally was thinking of the properties of our shadows, where our shadow is something that we sometimes see, sometimes we do not see. It is never accurate. It is, when we see it, it is always distorted, even though it is an imprint of us. And in order for us to see it with our eyes, it requires illumination and light. And I think about the shadow sometimes as the parts of ourselves that sometimes we can't see, like our unconscious self. Sometimes we can. That's more of like the subconscious. And how we interact with our shadow parts, how we see it, understanding that we can't ever see it clearly. You know, to me is like one of the tricky, interesting aspects of the shadow. And I think that when we talk about, at least in Western traditions, which is all I can speak to, is when we talk about doing shadow work, we're really thinking about bringing the truth to light, whatever that may be, and either becoming friends with certain truths or understanding that those truths are lies, or finding the gold in the truths. But I think a lot about the shadow also of things we're trying to avoid that are hidden in plain sight to a certain extent, depending on what they are. What would you say that's true too?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I would add to that, because I think that's great, is like, obviously our shadow is us, right? Like it can't reflect anything else or be a reflection of anything else, because that would be something else's shadow. So it's not just the things that you're trying to hide. It's like the you that you're trying to hide from.
The you that you're trying to hide from. I love that. I love that.
And obviously can't, because you can't get
it's attached. It's there.
You, wherever you go, there you are. You can't get away from yourself. So
it wouldn't be there. It wouldn't like come up if it wasn't there. If it wasn't part.
Exactly.
If it wasn't in your consciousness, you know?
Yes. And the interesting thing is that could be taken as a really like honorable, grand reality. Like, wow, there would be no shadow if I wasn't here. Like, I have that significance. But obviously we take it the negative route because we're nihilistic, supremacy, ideationist peoples, conditioned to be, not by nature. And that's the reality that we chose to incarnate at this time.
Well, I always say, so I'm glad this is going to be a segue, because you and I could just stay wherever we are for a while. But I always say, maybe I should start saying something different so the reality can be different. I always say that because we live in a shadow, because Western culture, let's get really specific, actually. My experience of American culture, it to me is a shadow culture. It is an abuse culture. So there's a lot of shadow material more often on the surface than not. So what I usually say is that when we're talking about archetypes, whether that be astrological archetypes or deities or celebrity culture or whatever it may be, we often can hope that we're going to encounter the idealized version of the thing, the idealized version of the chariot, the idealized version of lovers. What we often encounter, also because we love to learn by contrast, there's that too. We often encounter the shadow material. We often encounter what it's trying to hide, or the challenges, or the more sticky bits of the archetype of the energy, right? So like last year was lovers. I think we saw a lot of breakups. We saw a lot of selfishness. We saw a lot of where our internalized like codependency or supremacy or murkiness, our projections, our distortions influenced our relationships with each other and ourselves, right? Like that was pretty clear to a lot of people I spoke to. And so I was hoping you could share a little bit to get us started of what you think a shadow incarnate of the chariot archetype might present us with or show up as, or you can even start with some of the keywords that come to you or some of the qualities as you're thinking about the shadow of the chariot.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that came to me immediately is bulldozing. Bulldozing of
I
any
wrote that
kind.
down.
Oh yeah, you did. The another kind of chariot, the bulldozer. And being too quick to act, assume. It's not so much that about not taking your time, because you're always taking your time. Who else's time can you take? But like you are yourself. Like you have a shadow, you take up your space, it's your time. But it's more not allowing yourself to be where you are, and therefore always being in a rush to get somewhere else, or to get to the point, or to be right, or to win, or to have the most, or to be the authority. And it's kind of, to me, and I think I wrote this to you, that I used to think of the sun as like ego and will. And then I realized like the sun, it creates an ecosystem around it, but it itself is the center, of course, of its universe, of its solar system. But I think of the chariot as sort of like the elliptical that goes around the sun and dictates the relationships of the other planets, positions, orbits. So it's like how you move through your ego, positive, neutral, negative, because I think there's a positive, neutral, negative ego, because you're supposed to be yourself. So you are supposed to have an ego. Like you're supposed to be what you are. But any sort of rushing to get to an endpoint because there is no endpoint, and thinking that there is being in the shadow of understanding of like beginnings, endings, choices, which are beginnings and endings themselves. So also maybe stasis.
100%. As you were speaking, I was thinking a lot about how the chariot can be so much about movement and pacing and rhythms. And I love how you brought in the chariot as being the elliptical or the almost invisible track of gravity of the, it feels very physics or something, like between all of these objects in space and how things are moving. And this is so corny, but just bear with me. I think of the old slogan, old adage, like the journey is the destination.
Yeah, for sure.
But a shadow chariot could be like the destination is the destination. And, we're just getting there, which is what we see in midlife crises. We see this in our own lives. We see this in laments of like people saying, but I just thought it would be different. Or I thought when I had this thing, or I thought when I crossed the finish line, or whatever that goal is, there often follows a depression, not just because we will have natural ebbs after a peak. Like that's just normal, that I think all of us need to understand. I don't know why we don't talk about that more, but whatever. That's just normal. As the energy has like gone up, it's got to go down for a while.
Yeah.
Simple math and rhythm and season cycles. But I also think that there's this element to the chariot shadow of delaying celebration, delaying contentment. And if you attach that, hence the ego, if you attach that to a thing, to a person, to an achievement, you're going to have a pretty harsh come down, because that external thing, if you're not focusing on who you're becoming or what the bigger vision is for you, or what you're learning, or what you're integrating, or what you're shedding, once you get there, it might be magnificent, but you might not feel complete by it.
For sure. And the magnificence may not be meant to last in that form, because I think that a shadow of any positive is to be fixated on it. Right? So, like, when it is this, it will be the best thing ever. And that can be true. But that doesn't mean that that is all that existence is supposed to be, or that's the only way it's supposed to engage you. So I kind of like that about what you said, because for certain, stasis, delay, and rushing are all a part of the movement, the momentum, and the sort of ways that we create patterns in how we move through our choices, relationships, lives, literal environments.
Can I bring up another weird one that just occurred to me as you were talking?
Yeah.
If we're talking about movement and destinations and letdowns and disappointment attached to that, I also think of this weird dichotomy of, I can't believe I'm even bringing this person in, but here we go. This weird aspect of achieving some level of success, because we know that upright in its glory, illuminated, the shadow often is about victory. It's often about success on your own terms. It's often about combining your will with the will of the divine. It's often about being a very powerful channel and creating new roads, going new places in your life and the collective, new pathways, so on and so forth. And I think that what we're seeing a little bit of, and we've started seeing it since 2020, and I've been like noticing it, is not the backlash. I'm going to use the word consequences of success, which include, I am going to bring this person. I was reading an interview about Doja Cat, and what her manager said in the essay, this was in the past. I don't know if it's true now, just being clear about that. Haven't checked in on Doja in a minute, but Doja just wanted to rest and like play with her pets. And she was like really tired and exhausted and had to do all this stuff, like, because now she's super famous. And her manager said, Doja doesn't understand that the energy you need to maintain success is different and on a whole nother level of what you need to do to get there. And I think that that can also be sort of chariot problems of, you achieve something, and whether it's the ego grasping or whether it's the very real consequence of hurtling yourself into another dimension, the problems you're going to have are really different, and they're going to require a different set of energy or a different set of awareness. And a lot of people might just want to not do that. Or we might not be clear, because I think the chariot for me is so much about evolution, personal identity, transformation, and evolution. We might not even know who we want to be yet, but yet we still have to like maintain that thing, or certain people see us in a certain way, and then we're navigating that. Navigation, another chariot word. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit on that weird twist of, well, what do you do when you achieve some kind of success, or you have to maintain some kind of thing, or people start projecting something on you based on some kind of, project you've done or work you've shown in the world?
Yeah. I talk to my clients about this a lot, actually, especially recently, about how can you let a good thing happen to you? Because then your definitions, your identity has to change, because your expectations would change, because you would expect the best, or you would expect nothing. And when you expect the worst and you're used to expecting the worst, like this happens a lot to people when they get into a different financial bracket, or they move neighborhoods from somewhere, whether affluent or not, that was like decidedly unsafe, whether that's for domestic reasons, in-house, or neighborhood reasons, to somewhere that's safe, or another country or something. Or you find a good relationship or a good job, but your experience is that that is uncommon, if not impossible. And so the version of you that you have identified with for longest is someone who is unaware of that as a reality of day-to-day life. And then when it becomes a reality of day-to-day life, you have to believe that. You have to believe that's true, because a lot of people will then expect the worst and be waiting for the other shoe to drop. And if it doesn't, we'll find a motherfucking shoe, whoever shoe it is, and drop it themselves to preemptively like set the situation up for failure before the situation fails them, and then perpetuating the very thing that they said they do not want. So yeah, success is as much about allowing yourself to be in a good place and to not so much expect that, but know that that can be true as the alternative. And that doesn't mean that it won't change, because the Doja Cat reference is interesting, because obviously success in that particular field is based on a very particular structure, obviously a very masculine heteronormative structure, and also contracts, because the things that you do to get to success are different. You might make more desperate decisions. Then when you have the money and you have the success, you're like, wait, I can afford to not sell myself out here. And they're like, but you already did. So there's those. And I think that's also very shadowy, like what we have to pay for past versions of ourselves choices when we genuinely change or require differently. So that can be very charity too.
That's really fascinating. And it makes me wonder too, if this year we're going to see more and more of much different, much paradigm shifting conversations around what true success is and what it looks like and what it feels like. Because it's like you said, is it success if you're trapped in 3 years of contracts doing things you don't want to do? Is it success if you're in a situation like the golden handcuffs? And or is it success if you can't celebrate it, or if your nervous system, if your shadow, if your subconscious can't catch up to present time enough to calibrate a different level or energetic baseline as your new reality and new normal? As you were saying, like a lot of people just look for the problem, look for the issue, because we're so influenced and we're so patterned, and there's so much intergenerational trauma and epigenetics and whatever it may be. And this actually brings me to I want to hop on to another shadow, and that's like the shadow of identity.
Mm-hmm. The never-ending shadow.
Because the Chariot, to me, so much at its core, one of the great offerings it can give us is transformation of self, individuation, the self that is not influenced by our spirit. Like, I believe in reincarnation. Do you believe in reincarnation?
I believe in cross-dimensional incarnations, because I think all time exists at once. So yes, from a linear perspective, and then from a non-linear perspective, simultaneous parallel lives.
So we're like in the same realm.
Yes.
with our, many things can be true at the same time. So I think a lot about the Chariot in relation to our capital S self, our spirit, our spark, our aspect of source, our fractal of light that came in this particular carnation. And then we're the vessel. The external is like the vessel, or also the vessel is like our parents, or what happened when we were 5, or, whatever that may be. I think of the Chariot often as a soul retrieval card, where we're coming back to where we were, who we are, capital S, not the reactions from the shame, not the influences from our teachers that maybe didn't have our best interests, not what society tells us to do at whatever timeline we're supposed to be doing it on, but really taking back and reclaiming ourselves. And in doing so, like individuating truly, so that we can become closer to God or closer to source or closer to our source. And so I can see a shadow of the chariot, and I can also see a shadow of the success shadow we were talking about as being identity. Like if I have the identity that I'm always going to get messed over by anyone, then a lot of things will happen, right? But that's an identity that can be really difficult to move out of. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the trappings of identity, some ways you think about identity that offer you support and guidance when you sometimes feel trapped by particular identities, or when clients come to you and you see it's sort of an identity-ish, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, what I think what you said is so beautiful about the sort of retrieval process of self to self, because in the quantum, from the quantum perspective, the one is all and the all is one. So you are yourself and you are not yourself. And so that I do see that chariot as being cross-dimensional, cross-time, cross-space retrieval. What I like to tell my clients is we are the past lives of our future selves. And I liken it to, you know, when we were in elementary school and we had the stack of construction paper and we cut out the person and you stretch out the person, because those are all me. And each of me has passed the baton to the next version of me in the next millisecond or the millisecond of the millisecond. And the team of my experience is my identity. And that is my chariot experience in the course of a lifetime. But then I believe that the body is in the spirit. So when I return this body to earth, and I go to spirit fully, because of course it's a spectrum, it's a never ending spiralic movement. So then that pattern will regenerate itself on a higher level, which is to say that like my higher self and that will have a chariot experience and it will have its own definitions, and then my oversoul and my oversoul's oversoul, all the way back to the original thing. And of course then it's indicative that there would be shadow and illumination as a part of that process at every level in different percentages. And for me, I think that's the part that feels that's the part about identity that I think that we as the invention of humanity struggle with, which is that even in your own life, in the course of a day, in the course of a year, you can be very different people. So like if you can't believe that of yourself, how can you let that be true of humanity and not think there's something fundamentally wrong with you in that you struggle against that or struggle with that? And so the identity part of the chariot too is like the part about rushing or bulldozing that I really like about this card is, you know, it gets to be what it is for you and it gets to be what it is for other people. And there is room for all of that momentum. We don't know how. Apparently it's not our business to know how, because if we knew how, we would be able to navigate it without taking issue. And I think the identity piece that's so important with the chariot too is like you're deciding what is true. And obviously, when we think about even younger versions of ourselves or versions of us who did things that we now feel like cringe, wrong, like terrible, why did that happen to me? Like at the time, that's what you knew and that's how you identified. And as cringe or embarrassing as that might be, it doesn't make it less true. So if there is room for those two realities and the shadow effect between those identities, that is happening like infinite folds with each person. And so there can be a generosity of spirit that comes when we truly know how to move and have that momentum. And of course, that's like mastery, you know, that's like when you are so committed to what you are and how you are and what that is for you, that no matter what anyone else is doing, you're unwavering in your whatever trajectory, destination, identity. And of course, whatever, we can all aspire to the mastery. We can all aspire to that. Whether we achieve it in a lifetime, that's our own little chariot journey with ourselves.
100%. I also want to kind of call out more shadow based off what you said of, like, I was thinking about as you were talking and you said, oh, we're all these different versions of ourselves in one day. And just this morning, my partner made a little like joke about my age, but just like, it was cute. It wasn't meant to be malicious, like just saying I was old, basically. And then I go to the doctor and the doctor's like, oh, you're young. Like literally like an hour later. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, right. Like both are true,
Yes.
both can be true, but what are we going to like internalize? And the other thing I wanted to emphasize, or what came up for me as you were talking about identity and the chain of the cutout humans and the multiverse, is like studies have been shown, especially for trauma survivors, that making friends with our future self and really cultivating a strong connection to future us. I mean, witches do this all the time. Hello. Like we do this all the time. It's our higher self. It's our guides. It's our whatever that may be, whatever version of ourselves we're hanging out with, we're creating. We know that. Apparently, it's less traumatizing for trauma survivors to imagine into the future because it's more of a blank slate. If we let ourselves be in that state, that, whatever it might be, theta or beta or whatever, right? When we're calm. So there's that. And then we also know it's a magical technique, right? And so like I wrote like on Twitter, I was like, this year I'm not going to create a vision board to external things or things I want. I'm creating a vision board of me. Like I am a vision board. Like me, it's me. Because like you said, it's who we are as we're creating, who we are as we're experiencing, who we are as we're getting there, wherever there is, right? Yes. As I get older, at least, becomes more and more important. So becoming friends with that future self, I always say, like, I always want to make decisions that my future in the present, that my future self is going to thank me for, so that then I can develop a coherent, healthy, loving relationship with both my past self. Like, yes, my past self was cringe. Yes, my past self like did things that my present self would not do. And also, I don't want to hate on my past self because she was doing the best she knew at that time. Even when she wasn't doing the best she could do, she was deserving of love, care, compassion, as is everyone, right? So that chain of, I loved that chain of cutout people. Is just such a great illustration everyone could take with them to think about our becoming and the different aspects and versions and relationships we have with, not just future past, but like rippling all out into all fractals of consciousness everywhere they may be.
Absolutely. And, of course, I think anything like when I think of the world card, or when I think of what's sometimes the Wheel of Fortune or the medicine wheel, or even the chariot, anything with a wheel on it.
Right.
You got to think, well, whatever you do, whatever you want, but it's multidimensional. So it's a one-dimensional wheel and a two-dimensional wheel and 3 and 4. And when we get into the 4 dimensions and we're talking about any direction, we're talking about a marble,
That was the angels that Ezekiel saw that is linked to the chariot, because the chariot is the throne of God. So it's the Merkabah in Jewish Kabbalistic tradition. So the angels were actually wheels of 4 that could spin in any direction at one time. Just needed to put that aside.
No, that's wonderful, because I think of major arcana as our, spiritual existential contract. And of course, we would be an extension at some point down the linear timeline of an angel. You would be like the descendant of the descendant of the descendant of that spirit. But that the chariot wouldn't just mean your two-dimensional life. It would then mean your lineage. And then it would mean your community, and it would mean your neighborhood, and it would mean everybody with your passion in the world. And it would mean your era of humanity and all those things going out now, and excluding nothing. But that doesn't mean that your path will include everything, including everything you like or don't like. And so the putting on the brakes, the delaying, or the trying to bulldoze over or rush over is very much in the shadow element of the Chariot, I think.
Avoidance for sure is a shadow. Delaying what your intuition already knows you have to do, good and bad, right? You're like, oh God, I got to fulfill this prophecy or whatever, whatever it might be, but both good and bad. The couple other ones I had in my notes too, where I wrote spiritual narcissism and spiritual bypassing.
Interesting.
What are your thoughts on that, on spiritual narcissism?
I was looking in one of my decks and it said something like emotional motivation for the Chariot, because I guess it's rules like Cancer, it's associated with Cancer. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting to think about the Chariot in an emotional way, because of course, will, like the etymology of will is to choose or to wish. And our choices are obviously like emotionally motivated. So I think because I guess what I'm saying is like spiritual bypassing is just like emotional manipulation, like it's in the context of this is an existential truth, but you're also like, you don't know that. Like you're making it up and you're deciding for yourself what it is. And then you're extending that to everybody. And then you're making it seem like it's some existential truth. And that is very egoistic, but it's also not that like, obviously not that spiritual. So I kind of it was interesting hearing a spiritual bypassing because I was like, I haven't heard that word in a little while. And I wonder if we give them too much credit.
Tell me more.
It's almost like defining the language by the person who is transgressing, right? Like, meaning they're calling themselves spiritual. So
yes.
Then we're saying you're spiritual, but spiritually bypassing, but they're not being very spiritual, so like, why call them what they call themselves? Like, you guys are just fucking cultists, emotional manipulators, narcissists.
Well, that's another identity thing though, right?
Yes.
They're like, well, no, I'm spiritual and this is what spiritual people do. And we're going to ignore human emotions and human struggle and human hierarchies, and the suffering that humans often put upon each other consciously, unconsciously. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting.
Yes. And their own feelings too, because the funny thing is like, you just really want to feel this way. And you need as many people to co-sign that for you to feel comfortable in choosing that for yourself as possible. And so you're bypassing you're projecting because you don't want to just feel that way for yourself. Know it's good enough for you because maybe you don't really feel that way,
And on the flip side, I'm going to get really like layered here. I also think about, I can only speak for myself, right? When I get to places with things that I've come to some kind of acceptance of, peace, calm, and I can be happy. I can be fine. I've had people be like, why aren't you miserable? Or you haven't dealt with this issue. And I'm like, we're all dying and I have an incurable bone cancer. I think I've like had my own stuff. Like, I think I'm not avoiding anything. Maybe I've just processed my emotions around this, or maybe I can talk about something really difficult and hold space for your suffering without enmeshing with you, without becoming your pain. Right. Maybe I can hold space for you and ground. I don't have to reflect exactly your pain and your suffering in order for me to hold space for you, love you, respect you, understand it. And I think that's like another thing that sometimes can happen on like different levels. And the reason why I'm bringing that up, and I know I'm sparked by it, is because you brought up emotions and emotional manipulation and not understanding what emotions are ours, or how like that's a whole nother shadow of like our society not being able to, like, think about how cis men, or really any man, can't express tears, or what happens when they express, grief or sorrow or real vulnerable emotion. Just, so our society is we're so afraid to make space for all kinds of emotions and all kinds of states. And I think that is sort of shadow Chariot, because like you said, so many of our decisions and our choices run on emotions. Like politicians, they're angry. Athletes, they're getting angry. Like,
The stock market, it's called the emotional index. For
hello,
what? I'm like, oh, it's
for
based on your
who?
feelings. Exactly. Whose emotions?
Whose emotion? So, like, I think that's also something that we can all pay attention to this year of like, when am I getting flooded?
Mm-hmm.
When am I taking on emotions that aren't my own? When am I performing emotions? Because I also think Chariot is like performance and
Absolutely.
masks and personas,
Mm-hmm.
good and bad, right? Like there's
Mm-hmm.
like a mask is great. Personas are great. They can be creative. They can be really fun. They can be liberating. And also they can be a distancing
Mm-hmm.
device or a, protective device, which is very shadow Chariot, right? Like
Yes.
preemptive defensiveness, like
Mm-hmm.
fear of intimacy, all of that jazz too.
Yes. And what I wanted to say about what you were saying about with people wanting to be enmeshed or wanting people to take on their thing, in the Chariot, we could think about that as like people thinking that you can be in their lane. Something like I like to tell clients is you can't be off your path, you are your path. You can't be off yourself. So like no one can be in your self other than you. Like it's just you in there and the identity. Even if you're a conjoined twin, y'all have your own desires, your own preferences. You're not going to want to eat the same things and do the same things. You have your own identity. And so no one can enmesh with your path, and thinking that them doing so makes it easier for you or makes the burden easier for you to carry is also erroneous, because like they can't do that emotional work for you, right? So it's like I can maintain my neutrality and have empathy for you, sympathy for you, but that doesn't mean I have to take on those feelings. And if I did, it wouldn't actually make it easier on you. It would make it hard on you, because you would think that this is a coping mechanism that actually works, and it would just be misery having company.
Which is fine, by the way, once in a while.
Misery having company, yes. Misery needs friends
Sometimes you
too.
just need to like cry and with someone crying next to you. Like,
Absolutely. And all of those things can be true, and all of the paths can be true. And also, the funny thing is, I completely agree with you, because today I posted just some like glam photos, and I had a bunch of people unfollow me, and I was like, I can't be raging about the world every fucking day. Like some days are just for being fancy and putting on makeup, like we can fight again tomorrow or even in the next hour. Like
and that's very shadow Chariot of expecting someone to be this narrow thing that you need them to be, that will fulfill your projection, your idea of who you think they are, when every single person is this multi-dimensional fractal that has all of these different aspects to them. And it is really interesting. That reminds me of another person once I heard sharing, where she said her most unfollows were when she posted a story of her on a boat, clearly blissed out, having like the time of her life, like, just flowing in the wind, singing a song. And she got like so many unfollows. And she was like, oh, these people were like, didn't want to see me. My happiness was like an affront, like
mm-hmm.
showing them my happy moments. It's just, it's fascinating you shared that. So that's another sort of shadow, I think, of Chariot too, is like having such, okay, so bear with me. Lovers helps prepare us for Chariot. Lovers helps us get clear.
Mm-hmm.
If we step into Chariot without clear vision, we're going to put people into boxes. Things are going to be distorted. We're still just seeing things. We're seeing our truth, but we might not necessarily be seeing the truth and the
Mm-hmm.
whole and
Mm-hmm.
the largeness of everything. And so then that, like, a narrow mindedness and a rigidity and an inability or not wanting to step outside of the Chariot, to get out of the Chariot, also is a shadow, I believe, of the Chariot. I think of hermit crabs always having to, they line up to like
Mm-hmm.
get the bigger shell. I think of also out, like, a lot of us, I'm raising my hand, I'm like, full disclosure, like, we've outgrown our containers. We've
Mm.
outgrown our identity containers. We've taken on projections. We've tried to be so much for other people because we want
Yep.
to be loved and accepted and all that. And I think this is going to be a year of some of those vessels and those containers. We're either repotting this year, or some of them we're gonna really feel the edges and the constrictions they're gonna become so painful that we might either want to avoid them, or they'll just end up kind of exploding.
Right, because they won't actually be able to hold space for what is there. And that's also why you need the chariot. Like, that's why you want people to go on their path, so that we do not create these combustive bottleneck circumstances in our lives, in our relationships, and in our spirit.
We become spiritually constipated.
That is a fact. Humanity is definitely spiritually constipated for many generations.
The magnesium.
A big old rock.
There was a couple things I wanted to share before closing. So like change will never not be a theme. Hello. It's like the theme every year. And also I think this year we have to watch for like fears of being left behind, abandoned. I think we have to see where us changing our identity, like we're afraid to change our identity because we don't want to alienate other people. We want to like take people with us.
Yep.
Like thinking about going on journeys, right? Is Chariot traveling, going places, is like thinking about not acting because we're afraid of disappointing other people, and then also getting overly competitive or jealous or envious of other people as they go further along their path. I think we have to watch that as Shadow Chariot. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's very, 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 very true. And I think that just be generous with yourself and be generous with just see existence as generosity, because there are all these different paths because they're available to us. And if someone does not want to go with you, be good with that, because the resistance is going to cause such gravitational frustration for you. And that creates that tension, that creates cracked containers, including fragile identities, and a lack of resilience to the elements. And resisting what is there is doing no one any favors. So like, be as real with yourself as possible and allow existence to be real with you. Absolutely.
And as much as you can, try to separate the emotion from the truth, in the sense of, if someone is saying, hey, this isn't going to work for me, I'm not going to go there with you. I mean, I'm a sensitive person. I would have a feeling or two or 17 about that. And also there is a larger self, that future self, that conscious self. I think we have to remember, like, stepping in to remind us that that's really awesome that that person could be honest with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Trusting on an existential level where you're like, this is happening because it needs to happen, because it's real. And that must mean it's fine. And it's not something that's existentially wrong with me, but that it's just a part of my journey.
And watching out for unnecessary conflicts, bullies, bulldozers, narcissists, violence.
Yes. Being in other people's business, like, stay in your lane called your business. That's a big one for this year, because there's so much documentation and there's so much quickness to act that, like, make sure it's really worth it to you to get involved.
Yeah, be really careful about that, friends. The last thing I wanted to ask you, it's a question I get all the time when I'm teaching tarot, so I wanted to include it. And that is your thoughts on, so we've been talking about the shadow, and the shadow and the chariot can come up whichever way the chariot card is, if it's up, if it's down, if it's left, if it's right, because the shadow, as we know, is like inherent within the totality of an archetype. It's not, it can happen when it's upright, when you're feeling great, when it's down, you're feeling great, whatever. But there is a nuance, I believe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. I think there is nuance when we're talking about reversals, when we're pulling a tarot card and a card is reversed. when we pull the Chariot and it comes reverse, what is your take on a reversed Chariot?
The one that I think the easiest, if you just want like a go-to, would be overbearing. And I think you need to think of the spectrum of overbearing if you're reading the tarot, because overbearing can be that you are highly reactive, aggressive, abusive, bulldozery. And it can also mean that you choke down every word, withhold everything, restrain yourself to the point of popping. So, like, you got to give yourself relief and release, and there has to be movement. So if you want to think of the things reverse, just think of anything that the Chariot represents based on what we've said this whole episode, and then think of the best opposite thing that you can construct for that, because I would think that that would be the reversal of it, which is just to say the negative qualities of the thing that you would prefer not to have to experience if you don't have to.
I think for me, what pops up with Chariot is like, you have the opportunity to go a different way, but you're not taking that. Like you want to stay comfortable. You want to stay safe. You want to stay protective. You're going down that same neural pathway of, negative thought or limiting yourself or so on and so forth. I also think a lot about the Chariot reversed and being overly controlling, trying to control what is not yours to control, really like white knuckling whatever's happening, and not being able to like release or just be in flow or be in a kind of pace that is sustainable or that is your own unique rhythm. And I do think it can often be a refusal to shed, a refusal to look at the bigness, a refusal to look at that capital S self and make those different choices as you were talking about. So I think that all makes sense. You can think about a friend of mine, Monica Magtoto, has a great reference in terms to reversals. If you get stuck when you're like, I don't know what this reversal means, you can think, okay, well, what's the energy of the card for you? And what would you need to do to get to that energy?
Ooh.
Like to turn the card upright, as it were, right?
Yeah.
And I love that too. So you can think about that too when you get a reverse Chariot.
Yes. I hope that helps everyone.
I think it will, right?
Yeah, I
mean,
think so.
Do you read reversals?
I don't anymore, actually.
A lot of readers I know
I think
don't.
maybe it goes through seasons. I don't think when you recognize the shadow as a part of the overall archetype, I don't think you need reversals, because like you're already reflecting on what needs to be corrected or improved. We don't have to go all the way into the negative,
Exactly. And I also think if you're new to tarot, what I've seen is that the reversal can really confuse you, and you're kind of like, wait, am I not doing things right? Or what would this? And so if we want to become friends with our archetypes and with our decks, so just think about exploring the energy that you know it to be and not get so hung up on what it could be being reversed.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Sanyu, how can people work with you? I highly recommend Sanyu, by the way. How can they work with you? How can they find you?
Thank you. You can book me through my website, which is my name, sanyuestelle.com. I have a new single coming out, song. It's either coming out this month or next month, depending on all the back end things that you have to do to release a song without having it be like stealable. And I'm also writing some chapters in some books that will be out next year, and working on some of my own book proposals. But yeah, those are some things you can check out, but book me on my website.
Yay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, friends, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast. Thank you so much to the patrons of the Moon Studio. We cannot have this show without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And if you loved hearing from Sanyu, give Sanyu a follow. Her IG is Sanyu Estelle, all one word. Her website is sanyuestelle.com. You can book her there. And until very soon, I am sending you so much love. I hope that you and all of yours are doing well, are doing great, are doing phenomenal. Bye for now.